Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're gonna be reviewing the album Tubular Bells 3 by Mike Oldfield. Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog. Honestly, it really hasn't been that long since we reviewed a Mike Oldfield album, but seeing as this one is pretty distant in their discography as a whole, I think that the sounds are overall really different from one another, so I'm really happy for this refreshment. Anyways, here are some of my favorite bits from this album. So firstly, let me clear off this question that's floating in everyone's mind right now. What is this album doing on the list? And well, I might be a bit ashamed to tell you the truthful answer, but I put it on here and it's because of its name. Yeah, you know me, I love Tubular Bells, and honestly I've never told you this, but I also love Tubular Bells too, so I just really wanted to know what the third in the saga or in the trilogy sounded like, so I put it on the list anyways. Now in this album's case, one must remember that this one came out 26 whole years after the original Tubular Bells, and even if at the start Mike Oldfield was just an amateur, inexperienced in the musical world, trying to do his own thing, this Mike Oldfield that created this one was a well-established Mike Oldfield. He was wealthy, he had a lot of knowledge, he was making music for a really long time now, and honestly, it's almost not the same person, and you cannot expect this album to be the same album. But firstly, let's get to know the grounds upon which this album was built. So in 1966, around mid-1966, Mike Oldfield puts his old house in Buckinghamshire for sale, and promptly afterwards he decides to relocate to the village of Escobeles in Ibiza, Spain. And in that village he acquired himself a home and even built an entire studio inside of it, and that studio was actually already computer simulated before he created it because, technology. And you see, technology was actually a big part in the creation of this album. In the island of Ibiza, where now Mike Oldfield resided, there was a lot of partying going around, and in those parties there was a lot of the new electronic music, and Mike Oldfield basically fell in love with this sound, and he wanted to include that type of sound in his own repertoire of musical ideas. So one day while Oldfield was sitting at his house in Ibiza, he took out his Nord synthesizer, which was basically one of those analog subtractive synthesizers, and he started playing around with the original idea for the melody for Tubular Bells, but this time he had this unique electronic take on it. And well, whilst he came up with some variation that he liked, he took the rhythm section from the caveman section of the original Tubular Bells, paired them together, and what he created that day was so favorable by him that he decided that he wanted to create an entire album out of it, which would later turn out to be Tubular Bells 3. But you see, the production on this upcoming album was not as fast as you might think, because while staying in Ibiza, Oldfield got himself into a lot of bad things. Firstly, he was partying a lot, and he was starting to drink more and more, basically becoming an alcoholic, and of course, how could you not abusing drugs? And after one time being caught drinking and driving with an excessive amount of alcohol in his blood, his driver's license was taken away from him for 2 years, and he basically had reached rock bottom. So in the year of 1998, he put up his house and all his belongings in Ibiza for sale, and he relocated back to the UK. And there, specifically in London, Mike Mike Oldfield would start once again working on his long project of 2 years, Tubular Bells 3. And this album, unlike a lot of his other albums, actually contains no instrumental contributions by anyone else other than Oldfield himself. That is, if you don't include the sampling of the Moonlight Shadow drum loops, which were used and were actually played originally by Simon Phillips. But other than that, Mike Oldfield plays every single instrument on here, but that is not to say that he doesn't have any contributions. You see, the vocals themselves were actually done by many people, and well, some of them are done by Amar, which is the name of an Indian singer who actually sings on 3 individual tracks on here because she knows Hindu and she can sing the specific vocals that he wanted her to do. Another single we have on here is Rosa Cedron, which actually sings the operatics on The Inner Child. And of course, how can you forget about no other than Cara de Leon, which sings on the main standalone track from this album, Man in the Rain. Now let's stop the review right here and talk about this one in particular. Firstly, this album, unlike the last 2 Tubular Bells, does not just have this one continuous piece which is cut off into 2 pieces because, you know, vinyls and stuff like that. This one actually contains a lot of individual tracks which don't necessarily come off as one continuous piece, and you can see this most clearly with one standalone track, the single from this album, Man in the Rain. Now this song on the album literally just comes out of nowhere and has no real connection with any of the other tracks on the album. Now just for a bit of context about this one, this track, Man in the Rain, was written about 10 years prior when Oldfield was going through his 3rd divorce with his 3rd wife. And well, even if you think of it like that, this one still was created somewhere around the late 1980s, which means that it was created after Moonlight Shadow has existed for a while now. And the reason I'm stating Moonlight Shadow is because Man in the Rain copies or imitates Moonlight Shadow very, very closely. And you know what, if there's one thing which I hate more than bands that go ahead and imitate other bands, is artists imitating themselves to try and ride on a wave of success, which honestly is just the most like lame thing you can do. This song, Man in the Rain, is so similar to Moonlight Shadow that you can literally splice the two and glue them back together in so many different places and it would sound like it's the same exact song. Now you know what? Okay, so you decided to create Tubular Bells 3 and you've basically tarnished the legacy of Tubular Bells with creating something that is so off-putting and so unlike the original 2 that I honestly don't think that it even deserves that name. But then just nailing that one last nail in the coffin with creating this song which so directly imitates yet another of your most successful tracks ever. I don't like it. I really don't like it, and I think it's quite atrocious. So while objectively I would give Man in the Rain a rating of about like 8 or even a 7, I think that objectively it gets around a 2 because, you know, yuck. And as for the rest of this album, I wouldn't really call this one progressive rock. Actually, I think that it's really far off from it, and the most close thing that I can say that it is, it's of course new age. Yes, this is music which is highly electronic and it repeats stuff and it does things like Jean-Michel Jarre, and honestly it's pretty nice and I enjoyed listening to it, but I don't think that it was necessarily because the music itself was good, but it was just so different from everything that I've been listening to this year that it honestly became just an embracing thing about me to accept music which is even slightly different from the usual progressive rock I listen to on a daily basis by now. And while we can say many things about how Mike Oldfield never really seems to stick to one musical genre and always reinventing himself with the changing tides of the musical world, I can definitely say that this album is not a bad album. Maybe not the one that I was expecting to listen to, and definitely not one that would appease many prog heads, but honestly, as it stands alone, this one is a pretty enjoyable listen in my opinion. But honestly, coming back to the first point I made in this review, my bad feelings or my gripes with this album don't have to come from the music of this album, not from the ideas behind it, just the fact that it tarnishes the Tubular Bells saga. This album could have had so many other names, yet it was named Tubular Bells 3, and honestly I think that it was because the original idea came from playing around with the original idea for Tubular Bells, but other than that, aside from a few references here and there, this one has nothing to do with it, and I am pretty ashamed of myself for making the mistake of even assuming that that might be the case. So when it comes down to it, I feel like the right thing to do right now would be comparing all the Tubular Bells covers and talking about how they relate to one another. So looking at the original, you know, the classic Tubular Bells cover, I think that it's pretty nice. I think that it's too overcrowded, and honestly it just sets the tone for the iconography that everybody knows and loves, but I don't think that it's the best. And then coming into the second Tubular Bells cover, this one is my favorite. I like the rendition of it, I like the colors, I like how it looks, I love the purples and the yellows and the limited, you know, scripture at the bottom. It just looks good. I don't know, I think that it's a cool cover. And then moving on to today's cover, this one at first might seem a bit stale, but honestly, let me tell you this, I think that this one represents the album that it has very finely. Yes, this entire album just sends off these very wintry vibes to me, and it feels to me like a day, but a day that is obscured by a lot of clouds, thus rendering it very much gray. And well, what type of shade of gray do I think that a day like that looks like? Exactly this type of shade of gray. It just looks like the album sounds, and if you know me, you know that I think that that's always a positive no matter what you can actually see on the cover itself. So yeah, despite its simplicity, I would say that I actually really like this album cover, and you know, crucify me for saying this, but I think that this one's better than the original cover, and the second Tubular Bell cover is better than this one. So when speaking in kitchen terms, I do think that this album is about like raw cookie dough, and when speaking in musical terms, I think that this one gets a rating of 7 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're gonna be listening to Wind and Withering by Genesis. I know, I'm so excited. I haven't listened to it yet, but I'm gonna do so now. Yeah, I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Wan, Rist of Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best. And if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my About page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.